You are now listening to the Building Her Dream podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with introverted women entrepreneurs who are building their dream lives and businesses on their own terms. Hosted by business operations strategist, author, and the founder of Building Her Dream, Shayla Burton. To learn more about this podcast and our magazine, visit www.buildingherdream.com. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Building Her Dream podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Burton, and I'm so excited to chat with today's guest. She is Louisa Hext, a life coach and speaker from Minnesota. Hello, Louisa. Welcome to the show.
Hello, how are you, Shayla?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm great. I managed to get back, a second or two before we were jumping on, so it took a little while to calm myself. I'm excited to
Yeah.
see the journey we're going to take together.
Yes, me too. I'm really excited to chat with you and learn more about what you do. But before we dive into that, Lisa, if you could wake up tomorrow and have your perfect dream life, what would that look like for you?
Well, that's interesting because I could probably have multiple dream lives. However, truly, my way of being in terms of how I would feel would be really quite weightless, not so heavy, less anxiety, releasing all the stuff that holds me down. And what would I be doing? I would have this enormous horse rig, like, with a trailer
Mm-hmm.
with my horse, because I have a horse, and I would have, see, I have a horse. I would have like the living quarters in it. So
Okay.
I would travel all across the country, maybe North America, because you
Mm-hmm.
can easily get into Canada. And I would ensure that the weather was temperate wherever I went. So I'd time it. But I think that would be an amazing dream life. And of course, the horse would come out and we would
Mm-hmm.
ride together, we would be together. And I would connect with people who are horse lovers and those that go, "Ooh, there's a horse. Can I pet it?"
Yeah.
I've always wanted to have that opportunity. You can be kind of stuck if you don't have at least a mini trailer.
Yeah. Wow. Where is your horse now?
So I live east of St. Paul, Minnesota. And my joke that I shared with you earlier is I live in the Twin Cities with an English accent because I originally am from the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So I live closer to Stillwater, Minnesota, which is an old logging town on the St. Croix River. And then you cross over into Wisconsin. So
Mm.
Minnesota and Wisconsin, we're in Northwest Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And so my horse is in New Richmond, which is
Hmm.
about a 25-minute drive from where I live. So across the St. Croix. And it's a great place. It happens to be where my friend was able to buy some land with her husband, and she is a trainer and an excellent rider. Her name's Sue, and raises Morgan horses. And I happen to have a Polish Arabian, which sounds really odd. I say Polish Arabian. I always say it's an Arabian on stilts because they're
Okay.
really tall, much taller than a typical Arabian. So he has that classic Arabian head. I've had him since he was 6 years old, and his name's Babu, and he's 27.
Oh, wow.
And he just calms me. It's just the most amazing, intuitive soul,
Hmm.
really. That was a long-winded response, but
That's okay. That's really cool. to say you have a horse.
Oh yeah, and he keeps me poor.
Yeah.
Thankfully, hasn't had a lot of challenges. So
Mm,
he's not stabled inside, he lives outside, and it's with his herd, other horses, and it's a really small place, and that's what I love. I had him at another place that was like 60 horses, and that meant 60 people or more,
mm,
and that was just too much for me. It
yeah.
just that small, calm existence, it kind of undid what I wanted, which was the peace and tranquility.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Very cool. Well, Louisa, for people who are not familiar with you, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do?
So I shared a little bit about me and where I'm from. So I came to the US. I'm smiling because it's a while ago. 1986.
Okay.
I was 21 and I was
Mm,
pursuing a PhD in sociology. And I came to a place I didn't really even know existed, which was Columbus, Ohio,
mm,
because I went to the Ohio State University. People say that, the Ohio State University. And I didn't expect to stay in the US. Along the way, and kind of getting my feet wet in a year where I had the opportunity to take a job for a year when I was on a visa, I kind of ended up staying and things just fell into place. So my first career was in the field of disability, and I have worked in nonprofit and county and state government
mhm,
supporting families. So my entire career, the denomination of my work, if I had a denominator, was families, the constellation of families supporting individuals who experience disabilities, and how their families were engaged with them, life planning, supporting individuals to be autonomous, self-determined. And that's always been my thing, I think. And how did I come to Minnesota? I ended up getting a job with the State Department of Human Services, in which I was again supporting individuals with disabilities who are at risk to themselves and public safety. And there
mhm,
were all of these new rules about people couldn't live under one roof anymore. The institutions had closed, and yet there were people whose character and whose challenge maybe prevented them from living independently. And I've always looked at gift and capacity rather than weakness and limitation.
mm, mhm,
So moving right along there, thinking about where I am today and how that weaves, hoping that I'm staying on track. I ended up becoming credentialed as a mediator, doing a
mm,
whole array of alternative dispute resolution in civil uh, court, because I had worked, well, actually volunteered for the Civil Rights Commission in the city of Minneapolis, which is looking at protected class law. Not an attorney, but I became fascinated with the propensity of people who wanted to fight instead of settle. They wanted this almighty win. And the way that they would do that would be through the court system, sue someone, or um, win money, or destroy someone. And it never I mean, in my body, I'm very somatic in the way that I feed into how do I feel, because as a person, even though I present as quite comfortable with in a public setting, I'm actually very shy, quite nervous, And it's a challenge to be in the public setting. And so I wouldn't want for myself to be doing that, or to be creating what I would consider a scene, or to be I would want to move forward and to settle, because I care about getting to yes. And so from there, I became interested in the family system again, and working with families. And so from about 2006, I've served most of my alternative dispute resolution life. I'm credentialed in a number of things in family court as an independent contractor. And while that, what does that have to do with coaching? What does that have to do with the work that I do? Another thing I noticed is in my career, as I supported people who are uncoupling and going through divorce and having minor children, the level of conflict was acute. And every time I helped people settle, I would get more higher conflicted cases. Didn't want to do it, but there was something about me that maybe a calmer presence. I don't know what it is. And around the time 2012, I was looking on the web, and I came across a job, another contracted position, where I would be supporting a nonprofit based in the UK from London, which was quite ironical because I was in the US from London, that was seeking a curator of a traveling art exhibit around forgiveness, telling stories of people who, in the face of their own atrocity, have responded without vengeance. And I'm like, wow, this is interesting that in the heat of pain and suffering, at some point in time, not, well, okay, I'm going to forgive you and you killed my only son. I mean, that's an unrealistic response. However, that story, and you look 10 years later, there were people that were actually taking this path, truly moving through their pain and suffering, not avoiding it. And the courage that they had to actually get to the other side, and how they were able to be as individuals on the other side, because it was for them, not for the other person, right? That this atrocity. And I'm thinking of a colleague who passed earlier this year, Mary Johnson, who did exactly that from Minneapolis. She forgave the man who was 16 at the time that murdered her only son, who was 17 at the time. And I got that gig to curate this exhibit, and have been curating this traveling art exhibit for the last 12 years. It's been in Milwaukee, actually, at the Jesuit University in Milwaukee, which is, what is that? Right there.
Marquette.
There's a school. I'm sorry.
Marquette.
Yes. Yeah. And I started becoming just really interested in this everyday stuff. I mean, it's not every day that someone comes and takes your son's life. However, it's every day that we might get pissed off at someone.
Yeah.
And that's how, with the support of my mentor, who's the founder of the Forgiveness Project, which is the nonprofit that I still work with to this day, Marina Cantacuzino, she became my mentor. She didn't offer to be my mentor. It was kind of this organic thing. I've learned so much from her. I decided that I wanted to move away from this high conflict, me telling people how to live their lives, because a lot of it is adjudication and evaluation, to people's own self-discovery and their own journey with powerful questions from me to help them release their own pain and suffering. And we call this forgiveness, yet for every single person, that word means something entirely different to them, if that makes sense. So that's my, I guess, retrospective of my life.
Okay. Okay.
Too much?
So well, if I'm understanding correctly what it is that you do today,
Mhm.
uh, to put it into like simpler terms, do you coach individuals on how to forgive, basically?
So that's a really good question. First of all, yes, I'm a coach,
Hmm.
educator, speaker. I do not teach steps to forgiveness, but I create a space for inquiry
Hmm.
through storytelling, actually, to shine a light on the life of that individual. And which is a powerful experience to actually share your story is so healing if you have that space. And I offer one of the things that I've been talking about it is these days is helping people to build a character muscle that is potentially more forgiving. And people say, what is that? And I could share with you what that muscle might look like if you would be interested to know. It's a value system, really. Shall I share a little bit about what I mean to make it more simple?
Yeah, if you could do it like maybe briefly so we
I'm
can.
not very brief, am I? That's the story of my life. It's the verbosity of trying to see. You're probably going to have to edit. But long story short, very quickly, self-awareness, curiosity,
Mhm.
empathy, understanding, relinquishing judgment and grievance, meaning making. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That
Mhm.
so here today, as we're both self-aware, because we wouldn't be here today if we didn't have a sense of what is important to us, like I thought it was important to be here. But the curiosity leads to asking a question, perhaps, if I had lived your life, would I have done what you did?
Mm.
So it's stepping outside of this sense of it's all about me to consider, and it takes a very courageous person to do that. And then there's another piece, which is self-forgiveness,
Mhm.
which that's the deep dive inside of oneself,
Yeah.
which is actually more
Yeah.
challenging.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, people find it more challenging to forgive themselves than others. So, like, what guidance do you offer to those who struggle with self-forgiveness?
Well, one of the biggest things that I offer, I'll share a little bit about myself and how I haven't always been kind to
Mhm.
myself, and that kindness and compassion are the key. And visualization for me, of my, this is going to sound a little strange maybe, but this little girl. So I'm not thinking about the little girl that I'm envisioning inside of myself, but I remember my little girl, meaning when I was 6 years old.
Mhm.
And remembering that she was really sweet and kind and loving. And I really liked her. Like I liked myself then, and then life happened, and there was a lot of this kind of guilt projected on me, and life experience and judgment and the world, becoming more self-aware, then you're self-aware of what's going on in the world. And what's truly allowed me to move forward is remembering the little girl. In fact, on my desk, I have a picture of me at 6 years old.
Mm.
And that creates a lot of emotion for people. Yet at the same time, you get to have a conversation about who you were and what life was like growing up. And you can discover a lot about yourself, as can I. There's no recipe book for forgiving self. But what I can tell you is it's one of the most courageous things you can ever do. And I believe that in order to forgive someone else, which is actually a gift that you can offer to someone else, it's not something that they can take from you.
Yeah.
That we have to start with self. And so there's just a lot. I don't have a set. This is what's a struggle when people ask me questions, because the closest to steps were those kind of what I would call a value system.
Okay.
But I don't go, well, you do this and you do this and you do this and you do this. But there's a journey that we take that kind of peels off the layers of the onion, that we realize how we function as an individual. The other thing that I do a lot of work in is around attachment styles, how we are, the way we are in the world. And that also impacts our path around self-forgiveness.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense? Am I?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know that, forgiveness is really kind of misunderstood. So many people see it as, you are condoning what the other person did, or maybe you're just forgetting the harm that they caused. And so, how do you like redefine or clarify like what forgiveness is?
Well, you totally nailed it. That those are the things that people say. In fact, I ask people to give me one word that resonates with them, that forgiveness is for them. And there are a myriad of words. And there have been many occasions that someone has said forgetting
Mm.
and condoning. And they're myths and stereotypes that are not true. First of all, my perspective, because there could be someone listening that says, no, that's not that. So again, the space for inquiry. I do not teach people to forgive. I offer them an opportunity to unpack what is a messy, complicated thing that is named forgiveness. And it is not about forgetting, but what it is about possibly transforming the way that we think about what happened in a manner that's less painful. So I call it a transformation, a transformative story, a transformative journey. And the condoning thing is absolutely not the case. It's all about forgiving for self. I mean, I can give you a really acute example, very clear, that a woman who I call my second mentor, her name was Eva Kaur, and she passed away a handful of years ago in her middle 80s. And she and her sister Miriam survived Mengele experiments at Auschwitz. So she was a survivor. And it took her 30 years to get to where she was. However, she said that forgiveness for her, and she said this, I'm not saying this, was her chemotherapy, that she forgave for her. And she ultimately forgave the Nazis, but she was never condoning the act. She never condoned the act. That's one thing. The other is this idea that, there's another area, which is restorative practice, restorative justice, which is all about accountability. And we may never find, if it's about a person that has harmed us, that person may never be accountable for their actions. But that doesn't mean that you condone the act. It means that you make the decision not to be a prisoner to that other person's harm.
Yes.
The other piece that's really interesting, I cannot tell you the exact quote, but Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was a Russian dissident and writer, talks about, in a nutshell, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could put all of those people that have hurt us on an island? Get rid of all the bad people, put them on an island, all the good people, we're going to keep them here, and then we're not going to get hurt, when they're not going to have to forgive, we're not going to have expectations. He said, but you know what? Each of us has a dark side and a light side, or a light side and a dark side. And he said, who would give away a piece of their heart? Because it runs through, that we all have these experiences. So that also is work around self-forgiveness, is looking at ourselves as a human being that takes a path, and sometimes we trip and then we get up. And forgiveness is like that too. We might forgive in one moment and in one instance, and we might forgive after 3 months. Some friend hurt you, they spoke poorly about you to someone else. And then you go, why did I do that? And then you unforgive. And then you forgive all over again. So it's this journey. So there are all of these layers.
Yeah. Yeah. I always said that, I forgive, but I never forget. And then I've also said, like what you mentioned about, um, I say that I'm forgiving people for myself so that I'm not sitting around being upset or having this hatred in my heart. Like I want to just be able to move on and be happy. And so, I'll forgive people, but I won't let them have the opportunity to do something again to me. So,
I mean, it's just crazy how we allow others, to hold us back. We have a choice. And even in the most acute of circumstances, such as those of Eva Kaur and Nelson Mandela, for example, they made the decision to move forward, not to stay stuck. And there's a researcher by the name of Fred Luskin, who comes down a little harder. He's at Stanford. He's been researching and studying forgiveness for years. And he wrote this incredible book called Forgive for Good. But he talks about, you have a choice. Life's going to go on. Whether you choose to move with it or not, it's not going to wait for you. And that feels just really rough when you're in it, right? Like I'm a very soft guide. That's why teaching steps or making my work around forgiveness it's important for me to distinguish. It's about living a life that makes meaning and that has purpose. So if you really unpack forgiveness, that's what it's about. I mean, my word when you asked me the question earlier about if I woke up tomorrow or what this beautiful thing, and one of the first things I said was being light. Or am I, this heaviness, this weight. People talk about release and freedom as being associated, and it's also really healthy to forgive for your own way of being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like literally, Mayo Clinic has done studies in other entities, hospitals, researchers, lower blood pressure, healthier heart, you live longer, you're happier, less anxiety, stress. I'd rather live that way, but I'm not perfect.
Same. Yeah. Yeah. So, Louisa, how would someone know, like, if they need to work with you or, utilize your services? Like, how would they know they should do that?
That's a really good question. And one of the biggest things in the work that we do as coaches is it's so intangible. It's not like going and buying a couch, right? Or taking a vacation. How would they know? So I always talk about it as that the person is self-aware. And by the way, it tends to be a woman. Done a lot of research on this and conversations, looking for themes of what people share. So my perfect coaching question is, what do you secretly forgive? Or who do you secretly want to forgive? If I would ask that individual that question and they could answer it, that would allow them to begin to take the path because they've actually been feeling it or thinking about it. Also, there's this almost like this badge of honor that people are wearing as the honor, the armor, the protection, the holding on to this thing that keeps others away because they've been harmed, but it's not serving them. Now it's serving them, the person, because they're protected, but yet internally there's a struggle. You're not living your best life, and you know that, and it's a weight. And you want to release that weight. You don't want to eat another bag of chips to feel better, or drink 4 glasses of wine to go to sleep, or not talk to that person, or leave the room when that individual's there, and you want it to be different. And I think all of us have that experience, and yet some of us struggle with knowing how to take the path. And so I'm there to serve as a guide, to hold space. But it's hard to know. I think it's ultimately when you have determined that what you've been doing just isn't working anymore.
Very good. Well, Louisa, I mean, this is a really deep topic, so we could talk another
Oh,
couple of hours on it. Um, but before we go, I just wanted to give you the opportunity. If there's anything, one last thing that you want to share with our listeners, you can do that. Otherwise, you can just let us know like how we can find you and contact you if we want to, talk to you more.
so I'd love to share that I offer multiple complimentary webinars to get to know me and to learn about my work. I also offer complimentary, what I call a discovery session, so that people are not obligated. And I teach a 4-week intensive class. I suppose we call it a class, virtually online. I do one-to-one coaching and group coaching. And how do they find me? Probably by listening to this podcast and getting in touch with you. My email address and my website are potentially complicated to say, but I have a website which is consultantshext.com, Hext being my last name. And it's actually going to be changing soon. I haven't figured out when, but it will be called Embrace Forgiveness. Because I've had to be official for my mediation business. That's kind of the bland, stale. But I'm just an email away, a phone call away. And do you happen to put that information on your web?
Yep. We'll in the show notes for the podcast, we'll have your website listed there.
And the final thing is that I learned so much from every single person that I meet. It's not my expertise that moves this forward. It's those individuals' expertise in their life, because they have everything that it takes to make this possible.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. Well, Louisa, it's been really great chatting with you, and I really thank you for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And thank you to our audience for listening. This has been another episode of the Building Her Dream podcast. If you've enjoyed it, why don't you go ahead and subscribe, leave us a review, and stay up to date with what we're doing by visiting www.buildingherdream.com.